For a soul to start its journey, it needs a handful of courage and 2 of curiosity.
I haven't talked about it much on here at all, but I personally love first-person dungeon crawlers. There's just something so intimate about them that you rarely get from other games. I'll concede, they're not all great, and it's a genre that certainly isn't going to be for everyone. But they scratch that itch for me, and I personally consider one of the absolute best to be Labyrinth of Galleria, The Moon Society. Developed by Nippon Ichi Software, the same people behind the Disgaea games, as well as things like Phantom Brave, Rhapsody, and Soul Nomad, this is their crack at the dungeon crawling genre, and while the first game, Labyrinth of Refrain, has a ton of issues, I can't really say the same for the sequel. I actually quite love this game. The sheer level of character customization and individuality you can give your units is great, the dungeons are very creative and challenging, but in a way that doesn't feel downright malicious, and the story has so many layers that playing it a second time through completely provides new context to everything, especially as you start fitting all the different pieces together. I would honestly consider this to be in my top 20 favorite games of all time, and I recommend you at least give the demo a try. But while the game, for the most part, has a fair difficulty curve outside of a noticeable dip around the 40% mark of the game that later picks itself back up to the expected level, it also has a kind of absurd difficulty spike against a random throwaway boss in the first quarter of the game. So we're diving back on into random ass RPGs I found. Let's strap in and get ready, folks. The game begins with us throwing a name into the Lantern Day Phantasmagoria, whatever that means. This game doesn't have any sort of censors on it, so you already know what I'm going to be naming myself. Then our story begins by following our young heroine and main protagonist of this world, Eureka de Soleil, who's looking to find a job and is answering the application flyer that she saw posted in town. We meet an elderly witch called Madame Marta who works for the Count of Galleria Manor.
You can just call me Granny. Most witches don't really like having their true names thrown about all willy-nilly anyway.
After a sizable introduction cutscene, we begin with the witch's trial to track down a wandering spirit that we want to place inside of the Lantern Day Phantasmagoria.
Oh, what a pretty green flame. It almost looks like it has an eye floating in it. Wait, what? There is an eye in there!
Unfortunately, for one reason or another, Eureka is unable to speak the spirit's true name. It's almost like we had to make it ourselves, and the game can't account for all that with the voice acting, so we just have to come up with a nickname for it.
It certainly is inconvenient, not being able to use its name. Let's just call it the Lantern.
Oh, I know! I'll call it Fanty!
And like that, we're stuck as Fanty for the rest of the game. Anyways, our objective is to explore the Labyrinth of Galleria Manor, which can be accessed by going through the man-eating wardrobe.
The what?
Now, as the name suggests, it would prove quite fatal if Eureka or Madame Marta were to try and use the wardrobe, so we have to make use of the lantern to explore the labyrinth, as well as some puppet soldiers, which are wooden dolls resembling humans that are not biological living beings, so they can enter and survive inside the labyrinth. Now, we don't get to choose our initial lineup of puppet soldiers, but they actually have their own set names, which is a pretty cool detail you'll notice on a second playthrough, but I'm not going to spoil what that's for here. This runs us through the tutorial where we learn the basics until we come across a weird purple bird called the Wickard, which is acting as our tutorial boss, except nope, it summons another monster immediately known as the Basilia. This fight does not go well, and the Basilia absolutely destroys us in combat, where we will be killed very quickly and very easily.
An eyeball? A huge eyeball? It bit me! Ah! A giant mushroom! Wait, no! Ah!
Oh! You can actually see what's going on? My. And it sounds like they're done for.
Thankfully, the game isn't 40 minutes long, so Eureka is able to call Fanty back safely, and the puppet soldiers, unfortunately, might be a little worse for wear and unusable at this point.
Huh? But Fanty still hasn't...
Why don't you take a look in that mirror over there?
Huh? Something's on my head! Why?
It's able to stay here by using you as a tether to this realm. In plainer terms, your souls have fused.
Marta also lets it slip that she called the Labyrinth a den of monsters despite the place being uncharted, but she clarifies the Labyrinth is well known about, it's just doesn't have survivors coming back to talk much about it. So all we have are little bits and pieces and ancient rumors.
That shouldn't come as a surprise. We're talking about the sanctuary for works of art with supernatural powers, after all.
Now at this point we're given 3 wooden doll bodies and 3 puppet souls so we can begin creating our own party members, and not only can you choose things like job classes and appearances, but you can also set their personality to affect their stat growths, change the scaling of their stat growths, change their battle stances, which affect other stats and factors like how much you draw aggro and the likelihood of a skill going off if it's a random chance. And you can pick a free starting skill from the job class list, which is pretty busted when you realize there's stuff like increasing your stun value by 2400, guaranteeing the ability to stun lock enemies when you're at critical health, and the Aster Crow has a built-in Endure. This can get out of hand very fast in the best way possible. This game will get nuts, and you can have up to 15 party members out in battle at once. It is kind of absurd when you actually think about it. After all that introductory stuff's out of the way, we're going to need to do some more proper exploring of the Labyrinth of Galleria, and we're going to speed things up a little bit. After exploring the dungeon properly, we reach our first curio to art before getting attacked by the Wickard once again, and it summons in 2 Woodooms to get us used to it because this thing is our main antagonist for essentially the game's first half. Actually, it's kind of funny how our recurring foe of the game, and the reason we have so many boss fights, is because our antagonist is a Kuropeku that listened to entirely too much 3 Days Grace.
On the ground I lay, motionless in pain.
Anyways, the Woodooms are not very difficult opponents, they're more so the first enemies that will last more than 2 turns in combat. It's not too hard to deal with here. With them defeated, we conveniently are going to get a curio that acts as a catalog for all the other curios in the game, acting as our sort of in-game checklist. Well, that's convenient. Also, we learned that this curio thankfully is not cursed. Guess its power is really just being a durable piece of paper.
That's amazing! I didn't know you could sense curses so easily.
Well, you didn't collapse on the spot. That told me everything I needed to know.
We're going to skip through most of this dungeon because the narthex isn't that important for this video, so we come across the Wickard again. At this point, we're given our run back with Basilia from the beginning of the game. It can be a pretty dangerous boss fight, but as long as you have a tank to draw aggro, it isn't too bad. I'm not complaining though because it does give you a pretty nice and satisfying feeling of payback, but the fight does stand out because the Wickard will actually stay around for a little while and can throw on some buffs before deciding to eventually fuck off, which, let's just say this mechanic may or may not have some dire consequences later on in the game and during the subject of this video. Shortly after, we can meet a creature known as Garton that works on upkeeping this labyrinth, but we can't really do much else here at the moment, so we kinda had to go back. Unfortunately for us, I guess finding one world warping artifact within only a few hours is too slow for Count Bismont. Okay, in-game it's actually been a couple days, but still kinda goofy. Really, now he tells us to get back to work, as we're now on a non-existent time limit. It only exists in the plot and not in actual gameplay, so don't worry about that. We're not in danger of being unemployed and tossed out on the streets. Don't worry, the financial ruin worries will come around when I talk about Demon Gaze Extra in a future episode.
I suppose you could always sell yourself, but with your sorry figure, I don't think you'll find many takers. Anyway, moving on.
After a whole lot of cutscenes, we make it to Ops, the second dungeon of the game, that's much longer and has to be chipped away at for a while, as the Wickard returns for yet another bout.
I like it rough, 'cause I'd rather feel pain than nothing at all.
Yes, I know the joke's getting played out at this point, but it makes me laugh, so I don't care. Anyways, Diaz looks pretty cool, but outside of his charge attack being multiple mud element strikes, he's not really that dangerous, but he does have the same sigil that our puppet soldiers have on his shoulder, which is pretty interesting. Skipping ahead to our next dungeon, we reach the Yellow Transept, where we must battle the dungeon's guardian, the Thundercult. He's not difficult, but he will put up far more of a fight than the previous foes, as he's the first boss you're likely to come across after gaining additional packs allowing for different team member configurations, and this boss is essentially our tutorial on formations, with frontline giving everyone a massive attack boost, while retreat gives everyone a big defense and evasion buff. Basic, but this will grow drastically as the game goes on, and he is the first boss that's actually here as a genuine guardian and not just summoned by the 3 days grace bird, so you know it's a little bit more of a actual big deal. Unfortunately for us, we can't progress to the end of this place because we're going to be stopped by darkness, but not just any darkness, advanced darkness, so that means we have to go wake up Eureka.
Oh, welcome home, Auntie.
Skipping ahead even more, we make it to our next dungeon, the Crimson Transept, where we have a battle with the Lion Marquis. I don't see the lion motif at all, if I'm being perfectly honest with you guys. This guy is a physical brute that's more than happy to cave your skull in, but with near non-existent status protection, he's a bit easier than he may initially seem, as long as you have a way to draw aggro. Oh, look, we have a tank. However, our progress will be stopped once again, this time by a much larger than average gap that we have no way to get across. But thankfully we have the help from Nachiru, a very important character that I don't have time to explain in this video, as she'll be here to teach us about the ability High Jump.
I'm impressed you were able to get this far without being able to do something so basic. So inefficient.
But as our dungeon exploring takes us ever closer to the abyss, we've also are reaching the point where things are going to start taking a much darker and far more ominous turn than before. After a lot of work, we're able to somewhat safely traverse the abyssal zones of apps, which are so evil that they turn off your traversal skills, and will begin to wear away at your sanity, causing you to gain eldritch knowledge and slowly begin killing one another. Well, the abyss was pretty treacherous, but at least now that we're out we can take a break.
We were never ordinary.
You thought it was going to be another song from Ones, but nope, I went with Alienation. Actually, this gag is how I learned that Adam returned to 3 Days Grace, and they released a new album relatively recently. It's really good. I recommend checking it out if you're into that kind of music. Anyways, without much respite from the abyss, the angsty Kurapeko sicks the serial mascot persona on us, and it's more than likely to spell a very quick and violent death for you and your party. Now, despite the very bizarre appearance and King in his title, King HHH isn't any sort of significant opponent in the game. It's literally just a monster that the angsty Kurapeko summons to attack us with. Now, while I wouldn't call this boss frail by any means, with 40,000 HP, the last boss before him, the Lion Marquis, a few hours ago, had about 32,000 HP, so it's not that large of a jump in terms of bulk. But to make up for it, he can attack ridiculously often, being able to tear into your entire team and take them apart in one turn. And if you're really unlucky, the Wickard, who used to just flee immediately, will choose to stick around for a few turns to buff the king or heal him for over 10,000 HP. So unless you just choose to wait around for Emo Bird to fuck off, you're not going to have a ton of luck here. Granted, you could try to kill him, but with 20,000 HP of his own, he's not likely to go town before he does eventually fuck off and he wastes all your damage because you don't get anything out of him fleeing. Honestly, unless you have a ton of buffing items on hand, which is possible, but not super likely unless you've had great luck with random finds in the Labyrinth, there's a decent chance your first few turns are just going to be wasted, and with all of his attacks, you'll also be rolling the dice hoping he doesn't score a gore hit on you. Now, you may be wondering, Christian, what the fuck is a gore hit? Well, I'm glad you asked, random audience stand-in. In this game, you have standard attacks that do their usual damage range, and critical hits which do significantly more damage, which also have odds altered based off of different stats and random numbers. But a gore hit takes things even further by taking off a percentage of the target's maximum HP for the rest of the fight, which is usually portrayed by one of the target's limbs being torn off, and the health decrease is permanent 99.9% of the time. Additionally, with the limbs blown off, that means specific skills cannot be used, which applies to both you and the enemies. On top of that, losing arms or legs does a percentage damage. Meanwhile, a decapitation, or I guess your head being crushed, which acts the same way, is an instant kill that cannot be revived from until the unit is, well, fixed with replacement doll parts. Otherwise, that unit's just dead and gone, because you kind of need a head to live. Unfortunately, bosses can have their limbs blown off, but are immune to being decapitated 99% of the time, which is quite unfortunate. There are ways to mitigate the dangers of having your limbs blown off, but I'll have to go more into that during the preparation segment. Just keep an eye out for it. Unfortunately, basically all of this king's skills are tied to his head, so blowing his limbs off won't decrease what he can do. It just lowers his max HP. His last skill is also far and away his deadliest, where an exclamation point forms over his head, and his next attack will be an attack known as Ominous Death Howl. This will target your entire front line with an instant death attack that has roughly 90% accuracy, and there is not a way to negate instant death, meaning your entire team can get wiped if you don't know this attack is coming. And early on, yeah, it's going to catch you off guard. And any survivors will likely get taken out when he keeps spamming Devour to more or less stun lock you, because that attack does a lot of damage and has a high stun rate. Even if you know the attack is coming, well, it's not a free win. See, even if you know the attack is coming and you move everyone to the back row, he can still target one of your squadrons with a 75% accurate instant death skill, which isn't as bad, but still not a good time. Frankly, this fight is kind of absurd for a random throwaway boss, so the question arises of how the hell do we win? Now, before we get into how to win, I want to briefly talk about the difference between a difficulty spike and a fight that is just really hard. And to do that, we're going to go back to the game that started this whole series, Tales of Vesperia. Now, if you were to ask me who I think the hardest boss in the story is, well, I would have to say Commandant Alexei. He has a large array of combos, Guardian Frost, which means he can outlast any sort of slower playstyles, and his Mystic Art can tear you apart very easily, but he's also 70% of the way through the game after you've obtained every party member and a ton of their upgrades, as well as Mystic Arts. He has his own unique boss theme, and he's spent the last 20-ish hours of gameplay being positioned as the main villain and the supposed final boss of the game. His difficulty is very, very high, but it feels fairly warranted all things considered. Meanwhile, Gattuso is a random-ass wolf in an early dungeon where you only have bad options to face him and have no real way of learning stronger skills yet because so many of the game's mechanics are still cut off to you, while this damn wolf is wiping out your entire party in 30 seconds flat on normal difficulty. That is what makes this wolf the worst difficulty spike of the game, despite not being anywhere close to the game's hardest boss fight. Now, this isn't to say major in-game bosses are immune from being considered difficulty spikes, but usually there's going to be some more leeway provided and a proper expectation of difficulty from the game. These big story and in-game fights fall more into the realm of difficulty spikes when they take what the game has taught you and throw it out the window, making you learn an entirely new skill set, or if the game suddenly has a dramatic shift from a game that can be casually breezed through to a game requiring pixel-perfect precision at the very last step of, well, the game. So, getting back into Labyrinth of Galleria, is King HHH the hardest boss fight in the game? Oh, hell no, not even close. The hardest boss fight in the game is the final battle against the game's main antagonist. Now, I'm not going to show what this fight looks like, because it's a major story spoiler, and I do still highly, highly recommend this game, and I think you should go into this game with its second act being as, well, blind as humanly possible, but the player typically has some expectation of difficulty when facing off against the main villain in an arena that looks like the end of the world, and when the boss theme sounds like this. This reject cereal box mascot looking motherfucker, on the other hand, is just a random ass monster that the Wicker gets to jump you in the middle of the game's second major dungeon during a seemingly random collection quest, and this fight is never mentioned after the boss is dead. Things like this are why this fight being able to tear you in half out of nowhere is why I would consider this more of a, well, pretty crazy difficulty spike, all things considered. Sorry about that side tangent, but I kind of felt the need to talk about it and explain a little bit better. As for actually beating this boss, we have quite a few options for preparations. Now, it's kind of a no-shit Sherlock, but first is to make sure you've updated your equipment accordingly. It should be obvious, but when you're juggling around 10 main party members by this point in the game, and who knows how many reserve party members, it's possible you're still running some suboptimal gear on your main tank or damage dealer. Second is to check your karma, as this game tracks your naughty, no good, evil deeds, and the higher your karma, the more susceptible you are to having your limbs torn off by gore hits. Scapegoat can reduce it by 99 points. Keep this in mind, it's helpful. Third is Phanty Possession, where you can use your Lantern Spirit to possess one specific puppet soldier for a massive stat boost. but this has a trade-off where if the designated puppet soldier is to get decapitated in the middle of the battle, it's an instant game over like if you were to have a party wipe. Use it at your own risk, because otherwise you'll find yourself teleported back to Galleria Manor faster than you can say damn. Our fourth option is Poison Cheese, as this boss doesn't resist status effects very well, and the poison chips away at over 2000 HP of his every turn, so having a tank with a poisoning weapon can make it much easier to simply guard up and watch him slowly get chipped to death. Especially because poison just kind of appears on weapons with random effects, so that can be pretty useful. Finally, it is an RPG, so you could just grind levels, but we don't have access to the primo grinding spots of this game yet because there are two very specific ones, so the best option here is to just overflow the dungeon with mana, at which point you can spawn high experience enemies, but be careful when exploring. You'll know it's a potential enemy when it has the unique sphere in the overworld. Just be careful, because if you get unlucky, you may have to suffer the wrath of Kutu. No, not this one. That would be this guy. And, yeah, you will not be surviving a fight with the Reaper, as he is an in-game super boss, and he's straight up immune to most of your attacks, while also having insta-kill attacks that just straight up hit everyone. Don't mess with it. And if you really just want to beat the boss and move on with your life, not caring about the rewards, you can always lower the difficulty to Gentle World, which means you basically get nothing for your victory, but it also means he does slightly less damage and is no longer capable of tearing off your limbs. In short, you have options, so use them. Now, getting into the fight, winning is actually pretty straightforward, at least on paper, as 40,000 HP isn't too high by this point in the game, and we could cut him down in a few lucky gore hits. Or we could get really unlucky if Wickard sticks around and just keeps buffing and healing him. Offensively, he's going to primarily go for crush type damage for melee attacks and fog element magic for, well, his magic, with his largest shakeup being his instant death skill, which is always telegraphed by the exclamation point over his head and his head violently gyrating. So with a good tank, we can actually draw the boss's aggro and maybe throw on a bad status like Poison or Confusion, and now just focus on having your tank just stay alive. And for the most part, well, do that. Don't be afraid to utilize your reinforce points for either reinforce offense for more damage, or reinforce defense to stay alive much better. Also, you can spend reinforce points to have your own party members in the designated coven use an item for their benefit or act individually. That's something important to keep in mind, as characters don't really have individual active skills, it's all based off of the witch pack they are using. Meanwhile, their passive skills are based off the individual character. With only bash and fog attacks, a tank that's well geared can survive his onslaught surprisingly well, but having your karma at 0 is also necessary to stop him from tearing your limbs off. I mean, it doesn't guarantee he won't tear your limbs off, but it lowers it down to about a 1% chance as opposed to about a 30% chance. And don't be afraid to use your basic attacks in this game, because some characters will actually get to attack multiple times in a single turn, which can make normally unremarkable basic attacks suddenly become one of the most dangerous multi-hit moves in the entire game, each with a chance to get a gore hit on the boss. The damage shouldn't be necessary, but the bonus damage would be nice at expediting the process. Whether you choose to keep bludgeoning him to death or go for the poison strategy, just do what you can to pull out a win so you can finally continue on with this absolute gem of a game. And that's all for this video. I'm surprised it's taken me so long to cover a dungeon crawler, as there's a lot of options for me to choose from, and trust me, I will cover more sooner or later. Those familiar with this series may wonder why I covered Galleria before Labyrinth of Refrain, and that's because, well, honestly, Labyrinth of Refrain has a whole ass area that would qualify for this series, and sooner or later, it's gonna be a long fucking video when I make it. All this is just kind of one bad outlier boss that only takes up about 9 minutes of a game over 100 hours long. I hope you enjoyed this video half as much as I enjoyed making it. Please consider liking, subscribing, and hyping the video. Apparently, I'm starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel, according to some of you people. We haven't even cracked the barrel open yet. Anyways, I'll see you all next time, and I honestly don't fully know what the next episode is going to be at this point of recording, but I think I've got a hunch. Anyways, on that note, take care, everyone. You know, I kind of get what they're going for with this story, but honestly, it is pretty stupid. I mean, how short-sighted do you have to be to kill your own steady supply of constant income that's giving you a solid golden egg every day? I get it's about short-sightedness and desperation, but honestly, if you're getting a solid golden egg every single day, how are you in that desperate and dire of a circumstance?